Hey everyone, this is Nick, and sorry about the lack of videos recently, but there's some personal stuff I'm currently dealing with that is making videos a bit more difficult than usual. Don't worry, it's fine, no need to worry. I'll go into more detail in maybe another video for everyone. We'll see if I feel like it. Anyway, this week in the Linux and open source news, we've got an interesting blog post pointing out the remaining problems on Flathub that prevents it from being the default app store on Fedora, but most of those also apply to a lot of other distributions. We also have some malware being detected and promptly removed from the Arch user repository. We've got the end of Clear Linux. Very abruptly, this distro stopped being maintained by Intel specifically. And we also have internal leaks pointing out to the Steam Deck 2 being worked on right now, and maybe also a Steam console being made by Valve. And we also have this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It's your all-in-one platform to create, publish, and manage your website. Squarespace has really easy tools to make sure that anyone can end up with a really nice looking and well-optimized website, no matter if you know how to code or not. They have what they call their blueprint system, which lets you pick from a variety of templates that are pre-built and will suit any type of website, whether it's a simple blog, an online store, a video platform, whatever. All these templates are optimized by default to give you good SEO, but they also add some SEO-specific tools on top of that to make sure that your website just doesn't end up on the last page of Google. On top of that, to go further, Squarespace has their own design engine to create your own pages. You can just drag and drop elements where you want them, you can change all the colors, the fonts, you can just tweak the templates however you want. And once you have something you like, you can add extra features like your own online shop with a payment system, you can design your own logo from Squarespace, you can book your own domain name to have an easy to remember address. So check out squarespace.com/the Linux experiment, or just click the link in the description below and you'll get 10% off your first website or domain purchase. Okay, so let's begin with Flathub. There was a long blog post yesterday about Fedora's use of Flatpaks and notably its integration of Flathub. This blog post was written by Michael Catanzaro. He's a member of the Fedora packaging team. And it's a very interesting read on the remaining problems of Flathub, why it should be the default really for most things in Fedora and maybe other distros, but why it can't be right now for Fedora and also for other distros. Now, the initial hypothesis of the blog post is that Fedora will end up at some point being an image-based operating system and thus will use Flatpak only for desktop apps. I'm sure this can be debated, but at least to that end, the goal should be to make sure that the repo for Flatpak apps that is being used is the largest and best one, and obviously right now that is Flathub. Fedora Flatpaks, the distro's own repo, is just bad. There's no two ways about it. It doesn't have enough contributors, the apps being repackaged there aren't updated as often as they should, they aren't as stable, and they even create issues, like once pointed out by the OBS developers a while back. It's just not a solid option, apart maybe for the default applications that Fedora will ship on its potential image-based future. The issue right now with Flathub is it can't really be the default, the only default. First, because not all packages there are built from source. Some of the packages uploaded to Flathub might be for open source apps, but they are built from binaries. This is not a problem for proprietary software because obviously you can't access the source, but it shouldn't be fine for free and open source software. You need to know that the code that you're running is actually just the code for the app, that nothing has been added or subtracted. So you need to be sure that you're running the code as compiled from the source. Second, dependencies and runtimes need to be updated for every app. It is too frequent to see applications depending on end of life and old runtimes, and that shouldn't even be possible on Flathub. To publish an application update, a developer should not be able to link that update to a runtime that is end of life. This would also alleviate the issue of disk space usage because you wouldn't have to keep plenty of older runtimes around. Every time an app is updated, you would move it to the latest runtime and the old ones could just be auto-deleted. Finally, Flathub currently allows apps to poke holes in the Flatpak sandbox, which is something that can't quite be avoided right now in some cases. The desktop portals just don't have secure ways of doing absolutely everything that all apps require. Most things yes, but not everything. Meaning some applications do need some holes and some permissions, and thus are not as secure as they could be. With all of these things fixed, Michael says that Fedora should adopt Flathub as its default Flatpak repo, prioritizing it over Fedora Flatpaks and just keeping Fedora Flatpaks for the default pre-installed GNOME software. Michael concludes by saying that Flathub is not secure enough to be used by default right now, which I tend to disagree. It is still, in my opinion, more secure than distros repos or just downloading apps like an app image from a random website, because even though there might be some holes in the sandbox, you still have a sandbox for a lot of other things, which you do not have for distro packages. And also, if you download official apps straight from the developers, you are sort of better protected than downloading third-party repackaging efforts like in a distro's repo or from PPS. But still, there are problems remaining with Flathub. These are real ones that need to be addressed if this is to become the default repo. There's also the fact that we should absolutely let users directly contribute or pay for applications on a pay-what-you-want model. Flathub is working on this, but this hasn't materialized yet. So plenty of things to be fixed, not only for Fedora, but all of these issues also apply to any other distro that might want to put Flathub as the default interface to install applications. Now, internal leaks seem to indicate that Valve is indeed working on a Steam Deck 2, which is something we basically all knew would happen. The first Steam Deck has been insanely successful. It basically made this handheld PC category popular overnight. These leaks were reported on by the YouTube channel Moore's Law is Dead, and as always, leaks are rumors and rumors are all lies. Do not get too carried away. But the new Steam Deck would stick to an AMD APU, like its predecessor. What's more interesting is that Valve would also be working on a home console on top of that, something that absolutely delights me to no end. It apparently will use a Zen 6 APU, codenamed Magnus, projected to have 11 CPU cores, and also apparently being what you can expect to see in the next Xbox and PS6. The YouTube channel reporting on this says that this is going to be very powerful, that they're going to treat this as a proper console launch, so presumably with a nice lineup of games at launch, maybe some exclusives for Steam, some reveals at major events, and all the jazz that you can expect from a major console launch. And honestly, I would buy this day one without even really thinking about it. I like coherency, and running a PC as a console is just not perfect. Sometimes you get a weird pop-up, sometimes you get a keyboard and mouse only prompt and your controller just doesn't work properly. Sometimes you use a controller that is not perfectly suited for a specific game, like a DualShock 5 controller, but the game only displays Xbox controller prompts. All of this could be solved and could be made much better by a specific Steam controller and SteamOS as the base operating system on that specific machine, and also it's one piece of hardware which developers can target. They've done this with the Steam Deck, they would do so with the Steam console as well, presumably, meaning you would get defaults that are perfectly optimized for the console, and you would get patches and support specifically for that hardware, so you probably have the best Linux gaming experience that you could get for a home console. The Steam Deck 2, I could take it or leave it. I don't play all that much on a handheld anymore, but I would absolutely replace my current gaming console PC that I use running Nobara by a Steam console, and that PC would be turned into an editing rig, I guess. Now, this was bound to happen at some point or another. Actual malware was found in the Arch user repository, the user-contributed package repo for Arch, and also used by most Arch-based distros. Last week, a user uploaded malicious packages for Firefox, for LibreWolf, and for the Zen browser, which would in turn install a file straight from GitHub containing a Trojan. These packages only lasted for 2 days. They have been removed last Friday, which at least points to the quick response times of the team running this repo. Obviously, if you installed Firefox-patch-bin or LibreWolf-fix-bin or Zen browser-patched-bin, remove these immediately and scour your system of any file they might have left behind. Maybe run a little malware detection tool as well to make sure things are nice and clean. Now, it is the risk with all third-party package repos or all third-party app installs. It's true on macOS, it's true on Windows, and it's also true on Linux. Just because you add a repo instead of doing a manual download doesn't mean that everything in that repo is 100% vetted or safe. It could have been vetted, but somebody has missed the malware in there. Now, at least the AUR team has responded very quickly to this, and this is pretty nice. It means you are still kind of secure in most cases, but it's always better to try and install stuff that is packaged officially by the original developers. They could turn evil or hacky and try to hack your system. They could get hacked as well, but there are fewer chances of happening upon malware when downloading an official version of the app than when downloading a third-party repackaging effort. Now, in a move that really was not expected by anyone, I think, Intel decided to shut down their own Linux distribution called Clear Linux. This was a distro that had about 10 years worth of history, its main goal being to optimize the kernel and libraries heavily for the 64-bit x86 architecture, notably, obviously, for Intel CPUs, but not just. It did yield some benefits for AMD users as well. It made use of specific flags at compile time for all their packages and specific profiles to really optimize things as best as could be for the x86 64-bit architecture. So Intel said that they're ending support for Clear Linux and that effective immediately there will no longer be any patch, any update, any security fix, any maintenance available. They even archived the repo of the entire code in read-only mode, meaning that you can still grab that code and maybe compile packages or the entire distro, maybe even patch it if you want, but you can no longer contribute anything to it. This is very strange. There was no heads up. Anyone relying on this distro is now left out to either install something else or hope that someone rebuilds something really quickly with some new repos and a migration script. There's no explanation as to why they did this, but Intel has been laying off a sizable part of their workforce. They're not doing super well right now financially. They're being beaten down by AMD on the CPU side. Their GPU efforts aren't really taking off. They had some hardware problems with 13th gen and 14th gen CPUs. Basically, they're not in a good situation, and probably maintaining an entire distro and set of packages was far too much for the number of users that Clear Linux has, which I would assume is not that much, but still, absolutely horrendous way of handling this. You do need to leave a few months for people to realize that something is going to change, to find a solution, to migrate. If you had any enterprise customers of Clear Linux, they're now forced to jump through hoops to migrate everything. It's not easy. So you might have assumed that an Intel-backed distro would have enterprise-level kind of communication at the very least, if not customer support. But yeah, that's not a great way to handle the end of a distro. We've seen community efforts being shuttered with a lot more smoothness than what Intel just did here. Now, Firefox 141 was released this week with some RAM consumption optimizations for Linux. As I covered previously, Firefox worked on making sure the browser uses less of your RAM at startup, and also with each new tab you open, which is very nice. But they also made sure that you no longer need to restart the entire browser after an update through your package manager, which is also very nice because previously if you ran an update to Firefox you had to completely close it because if you didn't, every time you opened a new tab or did something, the app would just not do anything. It didn't affect Flatpaks or other containerized formats, but through package managers it just sucked. Firefox 141 also brings AI tab grouping, which is exactly what it sounds like. It automatically groups your tabs using AI. If this helper thinks these tabs match the same topic, they will just be grouped together. Everything happens on device, nothing is sent to a server, which is something at least. The address bar can also do some unit conversions, which on Linux is not a big deal. You can do that on most desktops at the press of a button. You can also now resize vertical tabs in the sidebar to make them a bit bigger and easier to click. And Picture-in-Picture now supports more streaming services, which it didn't previously. Web GPU is also enabled by default. There should be better graphics performance on Wayland as well, and there are plenty of smaller changes. I will not repeat myself on the AI features trend, which I absolutely do not like, but I can't complain. Everyone asked Firefox to be faster, smoother, and add more features, and that's exactly what they're doing. I will still stick to Firefox forks, not Firefox itself, because I don't like today's Mozilla, but still, they're adding the good stuff and it's gonna trickle down to all the forks, and I think that's a sizable and solid effort. Now, Proton launched their own AI tool called Lumo. It was announced as a fully private assistant where everything you type into it or give it access to is only readable on your device and not shared with anyone. None of that information will be used to train large language models or shared with other companies and third parties. This thing does what other AI tools do, so it sums up documents, it writes some code, it rewrites emails, or it answers questions, with all the usual caveats of chatbots and AI tools, these being that you just can't trust anything they tell you without double-checking everything. Unless Proton solve the hallucination problem of AI assistants, which I doubt they have. If you decide to upload documents, they won't be stored anywhere on a server or kept. All the files you share from Proton Drive will stay end-to-end encrypted as well, and it is free to use with a hefty $13 a month premium plan with unlimited rates and chats, extended history, and the ability to upload more files and larger files. The code for Lumo is open source, according to Proton, but when I asked Lumo where the repo was located for its code, it said that it did not have a public code repo for its application. It also supposedly doesn't log anything, and it's also zero access encrypted, so Proton employees cannot access your chats either. They say it uses open source language models, but I could not find which models they used, so I don't know if they are truly open source or if just the model is open but the dataset is not, which means they are not open source models according to the open source initiative. It is also the first Proton tool to move out of Switzerland and into the EU, because Switzerland has current government proposal that would make encryption not a thing anymore, and Proton is starting to move away from that. Now, full disclaimer, Proton is a very regular sponsor of the channel. I've been working with them for like 2 years. I really love what they provide with Drive, Mail, and whatever else, but this AI stuff I just cannot stand. I think it's a bad avenue to engage in. I think these products are not ready either to be given out for free or to ask for money for. The answers they give you are false. They are all freaking lies. Every single one of them contains something that is untrue, misunderstood, or misses the point entirely. You do not want to use that for any kind of serious work. It produces half-baked code, it badly sums up stuff, it invents sources, it invents documents, it invents numbers, and it will straight up lie to your face when you're asking it why it created something out of thin air. Those are not usable tools right now, and it makes me furious to see them being pushed everywhere. So thumbs down for Proton on this one, because just give us Linux apps for every single one of your products, and then maybe take a look at the AI pile of crap that everyone else is building, but this is not a priority for everyone out there. Now, in what might be the most cynical blog post out there, Github, so Microsoft, said that the EU needs a sovereign tech fund at the European level to fund free and open source software. They say that various country-level funding efforts should be grouped together into one massive EU sovereign tech fund that would, fund open source projects. Now, 96% of old codebases contain free and open source software according to GitHub, so it would make sense to dedicate money to support these crucial tools and libraries. And GitHub wants to participate. Not in funding, mind you, but just in helping organize the thing. So basically putting their dirty fingers everywhere, but not giving out money for the code that they pilfered to train Copilot. They ran a study that indicates the EU needs to pool funding between countries, basically acting as a central collection point for contributions from the industry, from governments, and from the EU. They're also saying low bureaucracy is needed, which was my first thought as well, because as much as I generally like a lot of what the EU does, they do tend to have a lot of red tape around everything. This fund also needs to be politically independent, according to GitHub, which, yes, but it is impossible in practice. You can only set up some guardrails that will have to be fought over every single year to avoid the budget being siphoned by private, weird enterprises. And also, funding should go to all free and open source projects, not just those based in the EU, which I initially thought was a stupid idea, but yeah, free and open source software doesn't really have any frontiers, so just because the funding comes from the EU doesn't mean it couldn't fund, like, I don't know, GNOME or Linux, which are not EU-based as projects. Of course, everything should also be transparent, so I do agree with GitHub's sentiment here. I think we do need those funding efforts at the EU level. But also we need to make sure Microsoft and other companies never even interact with that fund apart from giving money to it. GitHub has been the worst thief of code. They just pilfered every single public repo on GitHub to train their Copilot thing. They did not respect attribution, they did not ask users or contributors if they were okay with this, they did not follow the licenses at all. It was just massive theft. And now they're saying we need to fund FOSS, which they didn't do when they tried to make money from Copilot using free and open source code, which is, I think, extremely cynical and basically just disgusting. This EU-level funding effort needs to happen, but it needs to be fully for free and open source projects, not for funding open source AI tools of the industry. It needs to have an anti-lobby barrier that is millions of kilometers long, so no lobbyist can even approach that money or try to convince anyone to spend it there. And it also needs to have guarantees that if we fund free and open source through taxpayer money, basically gathered at the EU level, it means that countries and governments will be replacing proprietary software with these open source initiatives. So it's a complicated topic. I agree with the general idea that GitHub proposed, but I do not want GitHub or anyone else meddling in that proposal or trying to implement it, because this is going to end really badly if they do. And to conclude on today's episode, if you thought the TikTok story in the US was over, well, it is not, because the current US administration hoped to close a deal that would sell TikTok's US operations to a US-based company. But this has not happened. The Chinese government just does not want to sell TikTok's algorithm, understandably, because that's the money-making part. The latest version of the proposed deal would result in a US-specific version of TikTok that is expected to end up being quite buggy, because transferring 170 million US user profiles would result in some broken stuff, presumably in terms of history, recommended stuff, follows, maybe links. So in the end, here's another U-turn for the current US government, saying that they will end up shutting down TikTok if that deal is not approved, and chances are it will not be, because it would basically gut the Chinese version of TikTok to give ownership of the entire tech to a US-based company, algorithm included, which is quite unprecedented as a demand and would probably end up making TikTok invalid, for example, in the EU, because I think we currently trust the US less than we trust China. Now imagine if the EU told Meta that they had to sell the entire algorithm for, I don't know, Instagram and Facebook to a EU-based company, or they would have to shut down operations in the EU. Imagine how furious the US government would be about this. Well, this is exactly what they're asking of China and TikTok, which is kind of weird. But also, as a privacy enthusiast, I do understand the need to make sure that your citizens' data is not leaking to another country. You, as a country, want to be the only one accessing all your citizens' data for any purpose that you want. You do not want other countries to have access to it. It's the same in the EU, it's the same in US, and it's the same in China. So I do understand why they want to do it. It's just that they chose a super aggressive way of trying to implement that barrier. If you look at the EU, we did put a bunch of stuff in place to prevent that data leaking to the US. It's far less aggressive, but it's still pretty harsh. And I don't think you have to sell an entire company to achieve that goal. But anyway, TikTok users, maybe you're gonna lose TikTok in 2 months again. Or maybe it will get resolved if China caves in, which I doubt they will, because they hold basically all the cards in this negotiation. Just like today's sponsor holds all the cards when it comes to getting a Linux computer. It's Tuxedo Computers. You all know who they are by now if you've listened to anything I made or watched anything I made in the past 3 or 4 years. They've been a really strong support for the channel ever since basically I started to go full time, and they just make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. They have a big range of devices with plenty of options for all price points and all needs. Plenty of hardware that you can pick, including your own keyboard layout, your own logo engraved on the lid of your laptop. I only use their devices for everything that I do every single day. They're really, really nice. So as always, the link is in the description. Anyway, this will conclude today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching it or listening to it. Thank you all for your support. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are. Do click them. It does really help. You know where the comment section is. As always, all the links are in the description, and there are links to support the channel as well. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!